Some secrets don't hide in shadows. They bloom in plain sight. In a brownstone lined with orchids, a single cassette threatens to unearth a betrayal buried since the Cold War. When loyalty turns deadly and reputations hang by a thread, only one man can cut through the silence with precision, and another with wit sharp enough to follow. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you right now. Let me know in the comments. Settle in, because this mystery begins now. It was a Thursday, drizzling in that self-important way New York does, when it wants you to know it's not impressed with your schedule. I was at my desk pretending to care about the financial summary Wolfe made me draft when the bell rang. Not the downstairs door, but the front. Fritz answered, and I heard the quiet exchange. One of those murmured discussions that usually means we're about to be sold life insurance or asked to find someone's missing poodle. Then she stepped in. She was tall, late 20s, dressed in a navy blue coat that had done time in money before it found her. But what caught me wasn't the coat or the faint tremor in her voice. It was the way she shut the door behind her and then turned to check the lock. Once, then again. That's not nerves, that's survival. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Wolfe," she said, clutching her handbag like it might detonate. "Well, you've got me instead," I replied. "I screen requests for him like a bodyguard screens bullets." She sat, still clutching the bag, and gave me a look that made me revise the poodle theory. She cleared her throat with the delicate precision of someone used to being overheard. "My name is Beatrice Crowley," she said. "I need to leave something with you. 2 things, actually." Before I could offer a quip, she reached into her bag and pulled out a cassette tape in a plain plastic case, the kind you'd find gathering dust in a glove compartment circa 1989. She placed it on the edge of my desk like it might bite. "And this." She added a Yale key. No tag, no ribbon, just brass and mystery. I stared at both like they were fragments from a puzzle where the box art's been lost. "All right," I said. "Let's hear the pitch." "There isn't one. I can't explain. I'm not hiring you. Someone may already be dead. I think someone else will be." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "That's an unusual sales tactic." "I'm not selling," she said flatly. "I'm leaving those here because if something happens to me, they might matter." She stood as if that concluded her business. But I wasn't done playing. "What's behind the key? An apartment? A closet full of bones?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just a flat. In Washington, D.C. After 5 minutes of elliptical evasion and 0 actual answers, I decided she was ripe enough to feed to the boss. I buzzed the plant room, where Wolfe was no doubt whispering to an orchid more tenderly than he ever had to a human being. "I have a Miss Beatrice Crowley here with a cassette, a key, and a potentially dead someone," I said. There was a pause, followed by, "Pfui, bring her." He didn't bother rising when she entered. He gave her the once-over, more for classification than admiration, and folded his hands over the girth he maintained like a spiritual discipline. She delivered the same vague speech about danger and anonymity. Wolfe listened, narrowed his eyes, and finally spoke. "This is no case. A key and a magnetic ribbon are not facts, Miss Crowley. They are tokens. I do not work from tokens." "But it's urgent," she said. "That may be, but I am not an oracle." I gave her a look that said, "Told you," but her expression didn't flicker. Not yet. She sat, hands still folded around her bag. Calm. Too calm. Like a kid hiding a broken vase behind her back. "I don't want protection," she said quietly. "Or a bodyguard. Or surveillance. I came because I thought you'd understand what the tape meant. But maybe not yet." "Then explain it," I offered, possibly the 100th man to say that to a woman on the verge of disappearing. "I can't," she said, "because if I do, I'm next." That got Wolfe to lean a half-inch forward. He rarely moves more than required to cut steak or insult a police inspector. "Next in what?" Wolfe asked. She pressed her lips together. Let's just say, I overheard something I shouldn't have. Something recorded by someone who's now missing. Who? She looked at the window. Not me. He worked for a senator, that's all I'll say. That's also when I realized she'd rehearsed this, down to the evasive pauses and flick of the eyes. But here's the thing. Rehearsed doesn't mean untrue. Wolfe dismissed her with the warmth of a rejected manuscript. Unless you are prepared to speak plainly, Miss Crowley, you have wasted your time, and mine. She stood, adjusted the strap of her handbag, and said, It wasn't wasted. I needed to see your face when I said it. That was either chilling or cheesy. I hadn't decided yet. She walked to the door, opened it, paused, and did her little lock check again. Not once this time. 3 times. Beatrice, I said, following her to the stoop. You've got a flair for mystery, I'll give you that. But I'd also like to know which cab you take when you vanish into the fog. She didn't smile, but she did nod once. I watched her get into a yellow cab and disappear toward 9th. Then I did something Wolfe would call sentimentality posing as strategy. I noted the license plate, just in case the next body wasn't theoretical. Once she was gone, I turned to Wolfe, who had retreated to the globe of beer he uses to ignore people. She's either a very polite lunatic, or we just passed on something that'll make the Times above the fold. Pfui, he said, which was his way of requesting solitude. So I retreated to the office and popped the cassette into the player on Wolfe's ancient stereo, which Fritz treats like sacred relics. At first, static. Then a voice, male, maybe late 40s, clipped and precise. Vienna was the price, he knew it. The senator had to agree, no name, no record. Then click. That was it. No music, no credits, just a cryptic whisper about Vienna and a nameless senator. I played it again. Same result. Wolfe didn't ask what was on it. I told him anyway. He finished his beer. Archie, tomorrow, see if she exists. In the legal and geographical sense, before someone ensures she doesn't. The next morning, Wolfe didn't pretend to be uninvolved. He'd spent the previous night in the plant room with his orchids, which meant he was thinking. At breakfast, he buttered his cornbread with surgical precision. She used your name, he said. Not mine. Technically, she used no name, just a doorbell and a lot of tension. She wanted me to hear the cassette, he continued, but offered no case. That is not caution, it is manipulation. Sure, I said, but manipulation by someone genuinely scared. That lock-checking wasn't for show. He looked at me. Vienna, 1983. A senator, a recording, a key. These are not random crumbs. They form a trail, which means someone else is following it. You think she's being hunted? I think she's already been found. I didn't say it, but I agreed. He waved a hand. Find her. Use Saul. Use Lon. If she lives, I want her speaking plainly. If she's dead... He let that hang. I finished my coffee and stood. Fine, I said. But if this trail leads to another locked apartment and another half-finished sentence, I want a raise. Wolfe didn't reply. He just went back to his orchids. And I went to find a ghost. Wolfe doesn't like travel. That's not opinion. It's doctrine. He wouldn't leave the brownstone during a Category 5 hurricane unless it was to check on his orchids. So when he sent me and Saul Panzer to Washington, D.C. on a pre-dawn flight, you could say it was serious. You'd be wrong, though. It was fatal. We had a cassette, a brass Yale key, and more question marks than luggage. Saul was his usual efficient self. Sharp coat, silent stare, and a bag that looked like it contained classified documents or maybe snacks. I had my standard travel kit, a notebook, a burner phone, and a slightly illegal folding blade. Wolfe wants discretion, I told Saul, somewhere over Jersey. Saul nodded once. He's already behind. He doesn't like that. Neither did I. Beatrice Crowley had disappeared into cab-coloured fog, and if that cassette had any truth to it, We were flying into the sort of mess DC likes to call sensitive, and the rest of us call dangerous. The address led us to a building in Foggy Bottom that had seen better decades. Brick facade, secure entry, and a lobby with just enough furniture to look neglected. The super was out, or pretending to be, and the Yale key worked on Unit 6B like it had been waiting for us. Inside, the flat was quiet. Too quiet. It didn't smell like a crime scene. It smelled like someone had scrubbed one. Everything was too tidy. The couch cushions were puffed just wrong, the remote sat at a forced angle, and the trash bin was empty. Pristine. Saul raised an eyebrow. I nodded. Then we both saw it. Under the right-hand window, on the polished wood floor, was a single, muddy boot print. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just inconveniently real. Think it's hers? Saul asked. Not unless she wears a men's size 11 and forgot how to walk in heels. He crouched beside it, examined the tread. Fresh. Whoever cleaned didn't see it. Or didn't want to, I thought. It was the kind of footprint that said, "You're late." Saul went through the kitchen while I inspected the closets, half expecting to find Beatrice behind the coats. What I found instead was a navy trench coat on a hanger. Neat, expensive, and definitely masculine. Inside the left breast pocket was a slim, leather-bound notebook the size of a folded bill. The initials RD were etched in gold on the front. Not exactly subtle. The contents weren't thrilling at first glance. Dates, short notes, the occasional underlined phrase. But the shorthand wasn't yours truly's. Saul peeked over my shoulder. That look like politician notes to you? Nope. These are breadcrumbs. But they're not pointing toward a press conference. One entry stood out. It read, V, 1983, sealed. Ask M? Another page had just 2 lines. Gray knows. If not, G does. Saul frowned. Gray, I shrugged. Could be a name, could be a color, could be both. We bagged the notebook. Someone had left it behind either on purpose or too fast to grab it. Either way, we now had initials, ink, and a potential ghost named G. We needed a place to think, and that place was a diner 4 blocks down that served coffee you could shine shoes with. Saul and I took the booth by the window, where he could keep an eye on the street, and I could fiddle with the cassette player I'd borrowed from Lon Cohen's emergency stash. I rewound the tape and hit play. The voice came through, same as before. Male. Flat Midwestern vowels, but not homespun. There was weight behind it, like someone used to being listened to. No introduction, no welcome. It had to be Vienna, or the senator would have pulled out. She said nothing, of course. That was part of the deal. And no one was supposed to know about the guest. Click. That's new, Saul said. Yeah, last time it started mid-sentence. Now it starts at intrigue. We sat for a moment, digesting coffee and clues. What guest? I said. And who exactly got left in Vienna? Saul didn't answer, but the quiet told me the question wasn't rhetorical anymore. Back at the building, we tried the neighbors. The door across the hall cracked open just far enough for a suspicious set of eyes and a chain lock. Know the guy? In 6B? I asked. No, she said. Don't want to either. Friendly building, Saul muttered. We worked our way down 1 floor. Same story. 2 people didn't answer. One was on a call. Another claimed to be just visiting, but clearly lived there. This was DC. Tight lips were standard issue. Saul stepped outside and lit a cigarette, purely for camouflage. That's when he saw him, a guy in a peacoat loitering at the corner across the street. Hair too neat, stance too square, and posture that screamed former government employee trying to look unemployed. He's been there 15 minutes, Saul said as I joined him. Great, either we've made a friend or someone else beat us to it. It was beginning to feel like the flat was a performance, and someone else held the script. Back at the hotel, we debriefed over room service sandwiches and conflicting theories. Saul made a few calls while I went through the notebook again, circling entries that mentioned dates, initials, and anyone sounding like a spook. An hour later, Saul reappeared, holding a slip of paper. Got him. Who? Our friend at the corner. Name's Barry Nevis, retired DOD, spent 10 years on Eastern European desk. Now freelances for consulting groups. Consulting what exactly? Whatever keeps their pensions fat and their mouths shut. That cinched it. The notebook, the cassette, the scrubbed flat. It wasn't amateur hour. It was bureaucratic theatre. I picked up the phone and called Wolfe. His voice was dry. Did you find her? No, but we found her flat. And a tail. Silence. Then, return. Bring the notebook. This is no longer a matter of curiosity. It is a matter of offence. Which, in Wolfe's universe, was basically a declaration of war. We packed and left within the hour. The flight was late afternoon, and the cab ride was uneventful until we passed the flat one last time. I nudged Saul. Front window. He saw it too. A gloved hand, leather, black, was reaching inside the door of 6B and pulling it shut, lock clicking behind it. Still got the key? Saul asked. Sure do. Then someone else does too. We didn't stop. We didn't knock. Whoever had just relocked that door hadn't come to clean. They'd come to erase, and we were now officially late to our own case. Wolfe was halfway through his beer, his first, mind you, not the warm-up round, when Fritz entered with the Morning Post folded precisely, like it was auditioning for a geometry textbook. I was at the table, enjoying Fritz's latest attempt to disguise oatmeal as something worth eating, when Fritz cleared his throat. Mr. Wolfe. The front page. That was all. But Fritz's tone had just enough frost to make Wolfe pause with his fork suspended, like it was about to interrogate a sausage. I took the paper, unfolded it, and whistled. Wolfe-linked flat becomes crime scene. Aide to senator found dead in foggy bottom apartment. Wolfe reached for it without a word. His eyes moved line by line, slow and cold. I kept chewing, mostly because I knew better than to speak when Wolfe was digesting murder and beer at the same time. There it was. Raymond Dill, age 32, aide to Senator Lawrence Hargrave, found strangled in the very same DC flat where Saul and I had taken inventory less than 24 hours ago. The stage had changed, and someone had just stolen the spotlight. He finished reading in silence, set the paper down, and wiped his fingers with mechanical precision. Then, oh, the drama. He dropped the napkin with a little too much flair for a man who hated melodrama. I do not appreciate being maneuvered, he said. Fritz, sensing atmospheric pressure changes, retreated to the kitchen. Someone used me, used my name, used this house as a courier for misdirection. You think Dill was killed because of the tape? I asked. I think Dill was killed because of what the tape represents, Wolfe replied, and because someone believed I would not act. He stood. That alone would have made the morning headline if reporters had been present. I dislike insult, Archie. But worse, I dislike being treated as irrelevant. His voice dropped, slow and formal, the way he speaks when he's about to declare war, through the proper diplomatic channels, of course. They have involved me, whether they intended to or not. And once you involve Wolfe, he involves you back, with interest. While Wolfe did whatever mental calculus he does in silence, I went digging. Raymond Dill, single, Georgetown graduate, no criminal record, no military history, a background so clean it squeaked. Worked in policy analysis before he was picked up by Senator Hargrave's office 2 years ago. No spouse, no pets, no Facebook account, which, in this era, is either an act of noble restraint or deep guilt. He had risen fast, too fast. 2 years to go from clipboard-carrying intern to someone who got to write speeches and advise the senator behind closed doors. He had access, I told Wolfe. Not just memos, people, places, things no one outside a 3-inch clearance badge ever hears. And no enemies? Wolfe asked, lounging in the office chair like he was negotiating a truce with gravity. Not officially, but a guy who climbs that quick always leaves footprints on someone's chest. Wolfe grunted. Then we must find the shoe. Beatrice Crowley, if that was her name, had ghosted harder than Houdini in a fog machine. The phone number she gave? Disconnected. Her address? Belonged to a laundromat. I called every cab company in a 20-block radius, asking about a pickup on the date and time she left the brownstone. Got everything from polite denial to long sighs, and one guy who asked if I was from Internal Affairs. The cab license I wrote down. Fake plates. Either swapped or stolen. Take your pick. Wolfe, I said. We've got a vanishing act that Houdini would envy. She planned her disappearance, he said. Not improvised. That indicates professional help. Which makes her what? A spy? A whistleblower? Or bait? That earned him a look. You think she was a setup? She knew the cassette was dangerous. She knew you'd pursue it. And now the man connected to it is dead. You're saying she played us. I am saying, Archie, that the Queen sometimes sacrifices herself for the board. Great. I was on a chessboard and nobody told me which piece I was. Saul phoned in from DC, and I took the call in the kitchen to spare Wolfe's orchids from any stress. Arch, Saul said, I talked to the ME Dill died sometime between 2 and 4 a.m., strangled from behind, no signs of forced entry. We left the flat at midnight. Exactly. I relayed the intel to Wolfe, who closed his eyes and steepled his fingers. Then he returned shortly after we departed, he said, or never left at all. The door was locked when we got there. Not by him, Wolfe said. Whoever killed him either had a key or knew how to leave without one. Saul had also confirmed that the bellhop who spotted the envelope said Dill looked nervous when he checked in. Real nervous, like someone who knew his past had finally caught up. Wolfe said nothing, which, in his world, meant everything had just gotten worse. I sat down with the slim notebook we'd pulled from the flat. It felt heavier now. Maybe guilt adds weight. Flipping to the back, I found a final scribbled line tucked between 2 blank pages. G. Saw tape. Too late. No date. No initialing. Just fear compressed into ink. I showed it to Wolfe. He took the notebook with careful fingers and read the line 3 times. Who's G? I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he placed the notebook on his desk as though it were toxic. That confirms it, he said. Confirms what? That we were not the first. He sat very still, like a general studying the map of a battle he'd just been pulled into. And from the look in his eyes, he wasn't just thinking about the notebook. He was thinking about vengeance. That afternoon, Wolfe dictated a short, icy memo to Saul, then instructed me to compile a dossier. Timelines, transcripts, notes, and most importantly, everything we now knew about Dill, the flat, and the tape. They've sent us an invitation by corpse, Wolfe said, smoothing the edge of the notebook with one thick finger. Let us RSVP. Do I include the fact that Beatrice might be the most elegant booby trap in history? He arched a brow. Include what is useful. Leave out what is conjecture. He leaned back. We now proceed on the assumption that someone fears we are capable of discovery. Let us make their fear prophetic. I stood. And if someone tries to kill us next? He closed his eyes. Then I shall be most annoyed. I was polishing off a coffee and considering pretending to do paperwork when the front door opened like it had a warrant and a grudge. Fritz's protest was cut short by a familiar growl. Don't bother announcing me, Goodwin. I'm not in a polite mood. That was Inspector Kramer, bringing with him the distinctive aroma of cigar, damp overcoat, and suspicion. He stormed into the office, a manila folder clenched in one hand and his jaw even tighter. Tell your boss the NYPD has been graciously pulled into a federal charade, he said. And congratulations, you're part of it. Wolfe, already in his chair, looked up from a book on Roman governance like he'd just been interrupted during a papal election. I assume you have a reason, Inspector, beyond your usual disdain for propriety. Oh, I've got more than one, Kramer snapped. He slapped the folder down on Wolfe's desk like it contained a dead fish, and maybe it did, in a political sense. I took one look at the seal. It was from Metro Police, Washington, D.C. Things were heating up. Wolfe stared at the folder like it had personally offended him, which, in his view, it probably had. He opened it, glanced through the first few sheets, and let out the kind of sigh usually reserved for burnt eggs or opera singers who couldn't stay on pitch. Preposterous, he muttered. Kramer folded his arms. That's a polite word for it. I am neither a federal asset nor a municipal subordinate, Wolfe said, voice clipped. If the Metropolitan Police have questions, they may draft a letter, preferably one that does not smell of condescension and cheap glue. They're asking you to stay out of it. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Then they are doubly idiotic. First, for assuming I was ever in it. And second, for assuming I now would not be. Kramer gave me a look that translated to, "Your boss is about to blow a gasket." And he was right. Wolfe leaned back and scowled. Archie, get me the notebook. We are done tolerating half-wits. Kramer flipped open the folder and pulled out a photo. It showed Raymond Dill. Eyes closed, neck twisted in a way nature never intended. No mugging, no robbery, Kramer said. Guy was strangled with piano wire. Neat, quiet, practiced. Assassin's choice, I muttered. He nodded. And deliberate. Wolfe tapped a finger on the edge of his desk. This confirms the body was no coincidence. Damn right. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. And it wasn't personal. It was professional. Wolfe closed the folder gently, as if it were now a loaded weapon. Thank you, Inspector, he said. You have validated my distaste. Yeah? Kramer snorted. Well, buckle in. You're in it now, whether you like it or not. Wolfe didn't answer. He never did when he knew someone else was right. When Kramer left, more of a snarl than a farewell, Wolfe remained seated, hands folded across his waist like a Buddha with indigestion. I require Beatrice Crowley, he said. Alive. I require a week in Bermuda, I replied. We're both dreaming. Do not be glib. He pointed at me with the same finger he'd used on the folder. You will find her, Mr. Goodwin. Since the NYPD and their federal counterparts have demonstrated an impressive incompetence, we must rely on our own. That's not the part I mind, I said. It's the part where she doesn't want to be found. Then be persuasive, or deceptive, or both. He handed me the notebook like it was a holy text. You have until tomorrow evening. And if she's in a ditch? He closed his eyes. Then we must excavate more deeply. Begin. I left, wondering what it meant that Wolfe was using the word we. The cab plate I'd jotted down led me to a depot that serviced 3 boroughs and kept records like a squirrel keeps nuts, sporadically and with deep suspicion. I finally got a dispatcher to talk, mostly because I slipped him a 20 and complimented his watch, and traced the drop-off to a corner near the Bronx Zoo. No cameras, no building entrance nearby, just a busted phone booth with more gum than glass. The coin wrapper I found on the ground was stamped from a vending machine inside the Bronx Central Library, which meant she'd been nearby. I asked around. A maintenance guy remembered a tall brunette in a dark coat pacing by the phone, but when he came back 5 minutes later, she was gone. Vanished, like she had wings, or backup. I called Wolfe from a payphone, just to be thematic. Nothing, I said. Then she is still in motion, he replied. Yeah, I muttered, and we're playing tag with a ghost. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was already in the plant room, elbows deep in a pot of Miltoniopsis. He didn't speak until I handed him a printout of everything I'd gathered, which wasn't much. She's good, I said. Like Black Ops good. He grunted. Or desperate. He finally turned to me, expression unreadable. I shall take the case. I blinked. Just like that. Not just like that, he said, because someone, perhaps several someones, have presumed me blind, slow, and pliable. And you don't like being presumed. I detest it, he said, walking toward the beer tray. They have invited scrutiny. Let us oblige them, extensively. That meant the gloves were off, though Wolfe had never worn them to begin with. He lifted his glass. We begin immediately. I got the message. Find Beatrice, or find her enemies. That night, Saul Panzer came by with a look that said something had changed, and not for the better. I had eyes on you in DC, he said, dropping onto the red chair like it owed him money. Someone else did too. Describe him, Wolfe said, not bothering with pleasantries. White guy, late 40s, trim but ex-military build, drove a Chrysler with no plates, switched coats twice, probably ex-DOD or private intelligence. I blinked. He was tailing me. Not just you, the flat, then the diner, then the hotel. Wolfe folded his hands. So we are not alone in our interest. Saul nodded. They're watching, quietly, which is worse. Wolfe leaned back, eyes unfocused. Keep eyes on them, quietly, which is better. I raised a brow. We're in a surveillance war now. No, Wolfe said. We are in a reckoning. Surveillance is merely the prologue. He lifted his beer. The toast was silent, but it echoed like a warning shot. If you've never been inside a senator's office, picture a luxury car dealership pretending it cares about democracy. That's where I found myself the next morning. Back in DC, back in the mud, and not particularly thrilled about either. Saul Panzer was trailing discreetly behind me, playing the part of an irritated tourist with sinus trouble. He'd already done a perimeter sweep and identified 3 security cameras, 1 tailcoat intern, and a lobby plant he swore was bugged. I didn't ask. The reception area was all brushed steel, glass, and the soft hum of government money. A brunette with cheekbones sharp enough to issue subpoenas escorted me down a hallway to Senator Hargrave's office. Mr. Goodwin to see you, Senator. The door opened, and I was ushered into a space that screamed taste, power, and just a touch of paranoia. The man himself stood up, smiling the way politicians do when they smell either opportunity or trouble. Guess which one I was. Lawrence Hargrave was a man who had made a fortune out of never quite answering a question. He extended his hand, warm and firm, like he'd practiced it in a mirror. Mr. Goodwin, he said, from Nero Wolfe's office, I must say you're a long way from West 35th. And you're a long way from denying you ever knew Raymond Dill, I replied, matching his smile beat for beat. He chuckled, easing into a leather chair that probably cost more than my apartment's security deposit. Raymond was a valued aide, quiet, loyal, not the sort who made headlines. Until he did, I said. A sigh, the practice kind. A tragedy. But if you're here fishing for someone named Crowley, you're casting in the wrong pond. I didn't blink. You're sure he never mentioned her? Positive, he said. Never once. And yet the way he avoided my eyes made me think he'd rehearsed that answer, possibly in the same mirror as his handshake. I leaned back, just enough to look casual without looking like I'd fallen asleep. You ever been to Vienna, Senator? That got a reaction, just a flicker, a pause in the fingers as they traced the rim of his coffee cup. Vienna? He repeated. Of course. I was on the intelligence subcommittee in the 80s. Visited our attachés there. Why? I shrugged. The name came up. In what context? That's what I'm here to find out. Hargrave gave me a thin smile. I see. Well, I'm afraid that was before Mr. Dill's time, and certainly before yours. That much was true. I was barely old enough to spell defector in 1983, but I knew how to spot a dodge when I saw one. Of course, I said, standing. If anything comes to mind, do let us know. I always cooperate with investigations, he said smoothly. I didn't correct him. This wasn't an investigation. Not yet. As I was leaving, the office door opened, and in walked someone who looked like a fashion ad for corruption. Trent Voiles, mid-30s, slicked back hair, tan that didn't come from DC sunlight, and a watch that could have paid off half of Dill's student loans, assuming Dill ever had any. Mr. Goodwin, he said, flashing teeth that had met a dentist more recently than most lobbyists meet ethics training. Heard you were asking questions. Just looking for facts, I said. though I won't turn down a good rumour. Voiles laughed like he'd practiced that too. Well, you came to the right. Circus. Just no lions here. Only house cats. He stepped past me and into the senator's office without waiting for an invitation. I stood there for a moment, watching the door close behind him. If Hargrave was the public mask, Voiles was the glove that did the dirty work, and gloves don't talk unless they're burned. I waited 15 minutes, then caught Voiles on his way out, intercepting him with the kind of smile that usually comes before someone's wallet disappears. You ever meet a Beatrice Crowley? He blinked, just once. Name doesn't ring a bell. Try again. Nope, don't know her, never met her. He said it too cleanly, like he'd practiced in front of a teleprompter. I tilted my head. Dill ever seem twitchy? That earned me a pause. He'd been tense lately. Nothing specific, just a vibe. Maybe the job was getting to him. Or someone was. Voiles smiled again. Look, I get it. You guys think there's a grand conspiracy, but sometimes people just snap. Sure, I said. And sometimes they get snapped for knowing too much. He didn't reply, which told me more than he realized. The elevator dinged, and I stepped inside. I didn't look back, but the polished steel doors showed enough reflection to make me pause. Someone had stepped around the corner. Same tan coat Saul described, medium build, sunglasses indoors. Real subtle. When I hit the ground floor, I made a hard left through the lobby and out the side exit. Saul was waiting across the street, leaning against a newsstand like he'd been born there. Your shadow's still hungry, he muttered. Same guy? Same coat, same haircut, different posture. Maybe they rotate. Maybe they multiply. I gave him a grin. Keep eyes on him. If he blinks wrong, follow. And if he blinks right, follow faster. I left him there and ducked into a cab. If Hargrave's office had secrets, they came with bodyguards. Or maybe watchers. Same difference when someone's afraid of being seen. Back in the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office, sipping beer and pretending not to care that the house had hosted murder within a 100-mile radius. I gave him the report. Hargrave's dodging, Voiles' deflecting, and the now recurring shadow in the tan coat. He listened, expression fixed somewhere between bored and calculating. When I finished, he closed his eyes and said, The silence speaks volumes. Yeah? Sounds like spin to me. No, Wolfe said. Silence among men accustomed to speech is not discretion, it is design. He tapped a finger on the notebook. Dill knew something, perhaps something left unfinished. If Hargrave is not lying, then he is protecting someone who is. Or protecting himself, I added. Precisely. He finished the beer and set it down gently. We proceed, but carefully. I raised a brow. Careful's not our usual pace. No, Wolfe said. But then again, neither is Washington. There are two kinds of silence in the brownstone. Wolfe's, which comes with orchestral weight, and Fritz's, which is lighter, but somehow more condemning. That morning, I was on my second coffee and scanning the Times when Fritz appeared, holding something in his gloved hand like it had just failed inspection. I found this while tidying your desk, he said. It was a thin sheet of notepaper, neatly folded twice and yellowed at the crease. At first, I thought it was a lunch receipt, but one look at Fritz's frown told me it had ambitions. Where exactly? Inside the cassette insert. Tucked in. I assume it belongs to the investigation you've not spoken about. I took it, opened it, and my eyebrows lifted. So did my blood pressure. You assume correctly, I muttered. He turned on his heel with the practiced disapproval of a man who once served coffee to archdukes. I brought the page to Wolfe. Time to confess. The page wasn't typed. It was hand-printed, blocky but deliberate, like someone writing under pressure or trying to stay anonymous. Wolfe read it aloud, one finger keeping the fold line pinned open like he was cross-examining it. V. 1983. Black Book confirmed. G. Guest, do not name. They'll bury it again if breached. He didn't say anything at first, but both his eyebrows went up, the Wolfe equivalent of an opera singer shattering glass. Then softly, they'll bury it again. I sat across from him, trying to read his face. It was like trying to read Latin by moonlight. That's no trivial scrap, he murmured. Someone folded this to vanish. I didn't ask what it meant. Not yet. I had a feeling he'd tell me anyway, once the orchestration in his head had reached crescendo. Or once he found someone else to scold first. You handled the cassette? Wolfe asked, without lifting his gaze. Twice. And yet this page remained hidden, until Fritz discovered it while dusting. That's what it says on the tin. He shifted slightly in his chair, which in Wolfe speak is equivalent to slamming a desk. Mr. Goodwin, I do not employ you to polish surfaces, but I do expect that if danger is wrapped in paper, you unwrap it. I'm paid for legs, not paper folds, I countered. If I'd known a Soviet-era enigma was hiding inside the liner notes, I'd have brought tweezers. He didn't smile, but his lips flattened, which was either restraint or indigestion. Pfoy, next time read everything, including the margins. Yes, sir. He turned back to the page. Vienna, 1983. A guest with no name. Burying secrets. He spoke like he already knew where the thread led, and that someone else might want it cut. Wolfe didn't speak for the next 20 minutes. He retreated to the plant room like a priest entering a confessional, carrying the page in one hand and a glass of beer in the other. I didn't follow. I knew better. When Wolfe wants solitude among orchids, it's not for their company, it's for memory. It was another hour before he called for me. I found him standing near the cymbidiums, holding the folded page like a telegram from an old war. In 1983, he said, a Soviet asset defected in Vienna under highly confidential terms. The newspapers mentioned a diplomat's aide, unnamed, presumed dead. The truth was quieter. You think Dill found that truth? I think he brushed against it, and someone shoved back. Who was the defector? He shook his head. There was never a name, only a whisper, the guest who vanished. I glanced at the orchids. Apparently, some things bloom even in frost. Wolfe rarely speculates aloud unless the temperature drops below absolute certainty. So I paid attention. There were theories, he continued, that the guest was intelligence, that they brought a ledger, a black book of agents paid in shadow currency, the kind of book people kill to find or to hide. And this G may have been the courier, or the record itself. Dill's notebook mentions G saw tape. Too late. Perhaps the guest was the tape. I blinked. You think the voice on the cassette is the guest? I think the guest never truly vanished. They became something else, a secret stored, not silenced. He returned to his chair and took a long drink of beer. And now that secret stirs. That gave me a chill, not from what Wolfe said, but because of how quietly he said it. He wasn't just solving a murder anymore. He was pulling a ghost into daylight. Saul arrived just before lunch, trenchcoat still damp from a rain that hadn't reached us yet. He handed Wolfe a manila envelope without ceremony. Hard to get, he said, but not impossible. Inside were copies of an FOIA request, not public, not processed, not stamped. Raymond Dill, Saul said, filed it 4 months ago. Sealed, restricted request through a Senate back channel. He asked for files on a 1983 Vienna operation classified under Project Halberd. Wolfe's fingers tightened. And he got them? Someone got them. No record of a reply. But his access card was flagged the same week the tape appeared in DC. I glanced over the documents. Bureaucratic ink, vague form numbers, coded department memos, classic camouflage. Saul added, 3 days later, Dill moved from policy to speechwriting. Lateral shift, but safer, quieter. He was retreating, Wolfe said, or hiding. The silence stretched. Wolfe didn't look at me or Saul. He stared at the envelope like it might start bleeding. Wolfe reread the folded note once more, then set it down with the care usually reserved for relics or trap triggers. "This page was not forgotten," he said. "It was concealed, either by Dill or someone who wanted it found, but not too soon." I frowned. A timed breadcrumb. "Precisely. Then why us? Why now?" "That," Wolfe said, "is the question we must answer before someone else does. Permanently." He stood, walked to the globe, and poured himself a second beer, an act as rare as a third orchid bloom in February. The tape, the flat, the girl, they were arranged to provoke motion, to test response. "And we've responded," Wolfe nodded. "Yes, and now they know we're in play." I watched the page on his desk, handwritten lines, Cold War ink, a whisper that refused to fade. Someone had opened a door in 1983, and someone else had just slammed it shut, with us on the wrong side. Trouble, in our line of work, rarely knocks politely. It either barges in or rings the bell with the kind of energy that suggests someone's about to burst an artery. This time, it was the latter. Fritz appeared in the doorway with his usual calm, which only made the statement more jarring. "Inspector Kramer is here." I didn't need to ask if he had an appointment. Kramer treats appointments the way cats treat bathtubs, with disdain. "Does he have a file under his arm?" I asked. Fritz nodded. "Then we're in for entertainment." Kramer stomped into the office like the carpet had offended him. His suit was crumpled, his jaw set like reinforced concrete, and his face wore the expression of a man who had just tasted something sour and found a nail in it. He slapped the folder down on Wolfe's desk and barked, "You want to play with fire? Fine, here's the matchbox." Wolfe didn't flinch. He just reached for his beer. Kramer didn't wait for Wolfe to open the folder. He pointed to it like it was radioactive. "That came from Metro, Washington. Not for your eyes, technically, but unofficially they wanted me to make sure you got the message." "And what message is that, Inspector?" Wolfe asked, lazily peeling the folder open like it was beneath him. "To back off. You're stirring things." "Stirring," Wolfe repeated. A culinary metaphor. Odd, coming from a man who eats like he's defending his plate. Kramer ignored that. "They don't like that your name's been showing up on DC Chatter. Dill, the tape, Hargrave. They want this to go away." Wolfe flipped the page. "They might try wishing harder." "They might try more than that," Kramer said, jaw tight. Wolfe's voice dropped to glacial levels. "I do not yield to vague threats delivered with garlic breath." I coughed, which didn't help. Kramer looked like he might explode. Wolfe finished reading, set the pages down with surgical care, and took his seat like he was lowering himself onto a throne. "These warnings," he said, "are the rhetorical equivalent of a badly trimmed hedge, shabby, transparent, and deeply irritating." Kramer planted his hands on the desk. "It's not my warning, Wolfe. I'm the messenger. I don't enjoy being used either." "Then cease being useful," Wolfe replied. I grinned. Wolfe was warming up. That meant Kramer's blood pressure was rising. "This isn't some domestic spat," Kramer growled. "You're poking into things older and uglier than you know." "Older, yes," Wolfe said, steepling his fingers. "Uglier remains to be seen." He gave me a glance. "Archie, take note. When threatened, observe who delivers the warning. The tone is rarely more informative than the identity." Kramer snorted. "Careful, Wolfe." "Inspector," Wolfe said, "I am being generous. Do not provoke thoroughness." I leaned against the filing cabinet and made a show of crossing my arms. "If you two keep going, I'll need to grab popcorn." Kramer shot me a look that would have burned through plywood. "Goodwin, maybe you don't realize how close you're flying to a restricted zone." "Oh, I realize. I just don't respect the air traffic controller." Wolfe gave a grunt that might have been amusement, might have been indigestion. Kramer turned back to him. "This thing with Dill, it's got implications. Federal ones." "Then the federal authorities should investigate," Wolfe said. "Yet they send a city inspector to bark warnings." "You think I enjoy this?" Kramer barked. "No," Wolfe said. You enjoy being angry. This is different. This is reluctant obedience. Kramer's nostrils flared like a bull deciding whether the cape is worth it. Last chance to play smart, he muttered. Unlikely, Wolfe replied. The air crackled. I nearly applauded. Kramer finally dropped the hammer. Look, these aren't your kind of people. This isn't a jealous husband or a poisoned wine glass. Indeed not, Wolfe said. These people employ others to pour the wine. This is federal-grade politics, Kramer continued. Backroom agreements, legacy secrets, the kind of stuff that doesn't get printed because the printers get bought first. Then all the more reason to intervene, Wolfe replied, voice low and deliberate. Corruption wrapped in respectability is still rot. You want to help? Fine, Kramer snapped. But this isn't the kind of case that ends with a dramatic drawing room confession. I piped up. But we do so enjoy those. Wolfe ignored me. Inspector, I thank you for your theatrical concern. Now kindly return to your role. Kramer narrowed his eyes. What role? The one where you underestimate me. He stood, and it wasn't an invitation to stay. Kramer didn't move. Wolfe didn't blink. I've seen gladiators retreat faster than these two when they lock horns. Wolfe finally broke the silence. You come waving implications and whispering shadows. But you offer no case, no evidence, no request. I'm telling you to tread carefully, Kramer said. No, you are telling me to silence my reason, to ignore what I see. That is not careful, it is cowardly. He stood again, this time with intent. I will not be silent because men in high places fear their reflection. That's not what this is. It always is, Wolfe snapped. A man kills to protect the lie that defines him. If Dill unearthed that lie, then someone panicked, and panic leaves prints. Dill got himself killed, Kramer muttered. Wolfe leaned forward. Dill was killed because someone underestimated his curiosity, just as they now underestimate mine. His tone shifted to frost. Let them come. Let them threaten. But let them understand. If I am to be silenced, it will not be by whispers. I didn't say it aloud, but I agreed. That sounded like Wolfe's version of declaring war. Kramer didn't slam the door when he left. He closed it like a man doing math, adding up risks, subtracting allies, calculating the cost of being right. Wolfe exhaled and returned to his chair, folding his arms and tapping a finger against the armrest like he was drumming out a funeral march for political illusions. They want me quiet, he muttered. Then they should speak less loudly with their lies. I let that one settle, then said, that was a pretty spirited discussion for two guys who claim to hate each other. We do not hate, Wolfe replied. We clash. Clashing is honest. Hate is inefficient. Still, I said, I don't think he's bluffing. This thing might have teeth. Then we shall examine them. He reached for his beer, took a sip, and stared at the window like it owed him something. Outside, it had started to rain, lightly, insistently. Inside, things were just beginning to thunder. They say you should never answer the phone before your second cup of coffee. I hadn't even reached the bottom of the first when the line rang hot, sharp, and straight from Washington. Goodwin, I said, with all the cheer of a man who knew he wouldn't be finishing his toast. It was Long Cohen from the Gazette, speaking faster than usual, which meant something ugly had just tripped across the Associated Press wire. Trent Voiles, he said. Hargrave's chief aide. Found dead this morning. Hotel Franklin. Stabbed. Brutal. Room soaked red. They're calling it the Red Room. I sat up. This morning? Couple hours ago. You hearing what I'm saying? I was. Voiles was Hargrave's fixer. Paper shuffler. Whisper carrier. Fire damper. If someone had knifed him in a DC hotel room, it meant more than a bad night. It meant the curtain had come up again. And this time, the knife wasn't metaphorical. Details, I asked. Still sketchy, but blood on the walls. Possible message written in it. He hung up before I could ask if the press had learned cursive. I looked at the empty plate in front of me. The day had turned scarlet. Wolfe had just buttered a corn muffin when I delivered the news. It says something about the man that his hand didn't even tremble. "Trent Voiles is dead," I said. "Knife, Hotel Franklin. The press calls it the Red Room." Wolfe set the butter knife down as though it had offended him. "Act 2, he said calmly. "The stage is set, but the script is unfinished." "Hargrave's fixer," I added. "Dead men can't spin damage." "Precisely," he murmured. "He was valuable, not as a man, but as a buffer." He pushed aside his plate, untouched. Fritz, who had just brought in eggs en cocotte, froze in the doorway like a waiter at the opera. "They're escalating," Wolfe continued. "The bait is gone, and now they silence the witness." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "It is no longer about concealing truth. It is about controlling tempo." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean someone's conducting this orchestra?" "No," Wolfe said. "Someone is rewriting the overture mid-performance." By mid-afternoon, Saul had hit the ground in DC, blending into the Franklin Hotel's wallpaper, like he was born between concierge and elevator shaft. He called from a payphone outside the lobby. Messy job. Voiles was found on the bed, defensive wounds. One stab to the heart, blood everywhere, but not random. Meaning? Trail of it leads to the bathroom. He made it there, alive, and used his own blood to scrawl something on the mirror. "You got it?" Saul read it aloud. "G's turn. 110. I felt that drop straight into my spine. "What about the cameras?" "Half the security footage was corrupted. Guess which hallway?" "The one outside Voiles' room." "Bingo!" Saul never sounded impressed. That made it worse. "But," he added, "there's a backup security log, old school clipboard, and the timestamp on the erasure doesn't match what the desk clerk remembers. So we've got a cover-up sloppier than the stabbing." "No," he said. "The stabbing was deliberate. The cover-up was desperate." He paused. "Archie, whoever did this knew about the cameras. They wanted something deleted, but didn't get it all. And just like that, the blood trail wasn't the most important thing in the room anymore." I took the next shuttle to DC and introduced myself to a bellhop named Eli, who looked like he ironed his uniform but forgot to sleep in it. I didn't need to push hard. Guilt was already doing my work. "Mr. Voiles got a delivery?" I asked, flashing just enough badge to suggest trouble, but not enough to imply a precinct. Eli nodded. "Envelope, about 11. No return address." "Who brought it?" "Courier. Not regular. Didn't sign." "And after that?" He hesitated, licking his lips. "A man came around midnight, signed in under M. Gray, tall, wore gloves, didn't speak much." I showed him a few photos, Hargrave, Dill, even a younger Kramer for kicks. Eli shook his head each time. "No match." "You remember anything else?" "He asked for ice," Eli said. "Ice?" "Yeah. From the bar, not the machine. Said it tasted better." Even murderers, it seemed, had preferences. But Mr. Gray wasn't after bourbon. He was after something colder, and Voiles had bled for it. Back in New York, Saul had returned with more than grim observations. He had a copy of the hotel's physical logbook, complete with timestamps for every door swipe, guest request, and elevator hiccup. "Look here," he said, pointing to a neatly drawn line between 1:12 and 1:14 a.m. "There's a redaction." "Manual?" I asked. "Yeah, the clerk said the system had a hiccup. But he's lying. This was deliberate. You can't accidentally delete just one entry." "What was it?" "Unknown. But it was exactly 1:13 a.m., 1 hour before the maid found Voiles bleeding into his pillow." I leaned back. So whoever came in, or left, at that time knew what they were doing. They didn't just stab the guy, they stabbed the timeline. Saul nodded. "And used the staff to patch the wound. Any way to recover it?" "Working on it," Saul said. "But there's something else." He held up Dill's notebook. "You might want to see what was marked at 1:10. And just like that, the clock began ticking backward. Wolfe was in mid-lecture when I returned. Badly timed choreography, he said, sipping beer with the solemnity of a judge pronouncing sentence. That's what this is. I raised an eyebrow. You lost me. Dill was bait. Voiles was leverage. The murderer is rearranging scenes mid-performance, hoping the audience doesn't notice the stagehands bleeding behind the curtain. That's poetic. It is practical, he snapped. The attempt to mask a motive by accelerating the sequence of events. Dill dies. Voiles follows. Each corpse masks the one before. And what's the climax supposed to be? Control, Wolfe said. Of a narrative, of exposure. Someone is rearranging facts to control fallout. Then we're watching a cover-up unfold in real time. No, Mr. Goodwin. We are watching a farce dressed in the velvet of tragedy. He leaned back, glowering. And I am not amused. That makes two of us, I muttered. Wolfe closed his eyes. Find the missing cue. The rest will perform itself. It was Saul, calm as a clockmaker, who connected the ticking dots. Dill's notebook, he said, flipping to a weathered page. There, G's signal window, 110. G, Wolfe murmured. Gray? I asked. Possibly, or Gava, or even G as a code name. Dill noted it as a signal. Voiles referenced it in blood. Wolfe turned the page gently, as if the ink might whisper. At 1:10, a signal was sent. At 1:13, an entry was erased. At 2:14, a corpse was found. He nodded once, like a maestro hearing the cue. The script, he said, has just begun to repeat its lines. And I knew then, we weren't chasing a murderer. We were catching up to a performance that had started long before we were seated. There are a few things you don't see every day. Fritz burning toast, Wolfe skipping a beer, or our office turning into Broadway. That morning, Wolfe told me, Mr. Goodwin, summon them all. The cast is due their curtain call. By them all, he meant the senator, Beatrice Hargrave, Inspector Kramer, Saul, Lon Cohen if available, and even poor Nurse Gleason, who looked like she'd prefer the flu over another visit to us. I worked the phone like a press agent with blackmail on the line. By 3 p.m, the office was packed like a courtroom with bad acoustics. Hargrave wore senatorial smug, Beatrice wore grief like silk, and Kramer, bless him, looked like he'd walked into a play he hated but couldn't leave. Wolfe didn't enter right away. He let them simmer. He was staging Act 3 and the house lights were still up. Wolfe entered like a man unimpressed by the company, and even less so by the need to tolerate them. He did not, to everyone's astonishment, including mine, take his chair. Instead, he stood. Wolfe never stands. He moved with the slow gravity of a planet, taking 2 deliberate steps across the rug and turning, hands clasped behind him. Then came silence. Not a long one, not a dramatic one, a surgical one. Beatrice shifted in her seat. Hargrave stared at the bookshelves like they owed him a rescue. Kramer narrowed his eyes, sniffing blood under the cologne. Wolfe finally said, I abhor theatre. He paused. But it has uses. When truth is treated as illusion, one must construct a stage sturdy enough to hold it. He turned toward me. Mr. Goodwin, the cassette, if you please. And just like that, the curtains lifted. I walked over to Wolfe's desk, where the cassette player waited like a coiled trap. I pressed play. The audio was crackly, old, but not so old that it couldn't deliver a punch. A man's voice, clearer now after Saul's tech wizardry, spoke in clipped, frightened bursts. Defected under Project Hawthorne, 1983. US contact known as Gideon. Promised safe passage. Hargrave was Gideon. Hargrave, seated stiffly, didn't blink, but his cheek twitched. Beatrice, sitting beside him, sucked in a breath sharp enough to cut glass. Kramer leaned forward. That voice? A minor attaché, Wolfe said. Vanished in 1985, presumed dead, until this cassette arrived last week. The tape hissed again before cutting off. I warned you, Arthur, the voice finished. Truth doesn't stay buried, even in Moscow snow. I clicked it off. The silence that followed wasn't theatrical. It was heavy. Cold. laced with 30-year-old frost. Wolfe spoke next, his tone measured and icy. Frederick Dill, he began, was not merely compiling trivia for a senator's memoir. He was digging through sealed diplomatic archives, retrieved, I suspect, through unofficial favors. He paced once, then stopped. He uncovered the correspondence, the timelines, the cassette, and most damningly, a memo naming the defector's last contact, Gideon, cross-referenced with State Department flight logs from October 1983. Wolfe looked at Beatrice. Your father, Ms. Hargrave, disappeared in Berlin the same week those logs were sealed. The implication: he was the defector. Hargrave was his handler. Beatrice's hands trembled, but she didn't look away. Wolfe turned, facing Hargrave now. Dill knew. He confirmed the link, and someone, likely under your instruction, killed him to stop the truth. Kramer straightened. Wolfe added, Voiles learned too late. His blood served as punctuation. No one clapped, but the script was clear now. Hargrave tried humor first. A dry chuckle. You people have an imagination fit for cable news. But Wolfe didn't flinch, and Saul, seated to my right, opened a folder with all the casual menace of a guillotine operator checking rope tension. Inside were copies, flight records, typed pages, surveillance stills, and one scanned memo that bore a very expensive signature. Hargrave's laughter died the way a motor does when it hits water. He blinked. Once. Then he said, Let's not make this worse. Kramer growled, Too late, Senator. Hargrave raised a hand. Quiet resolution. For the country's sake. Wolfe sniffed like someone had just used the wrong fork. The country, he said, survives better on truth than secrets. Hargrave sagged an inch. Not much, but enough. Only when Hargrave stopped resisting did Wolfe, at last, lower himself into his chair with the dignity of a king reclaiming a throne. He rested his elbows on the armrests, closed his eyes a moment, then opened them with finality. Concluded, he said. The word was neither triumphant nor kind. It was fact. I reached for the phone without needing instruction. Kramer, I said, we're ready. Wolfe gave the barest nod. Give him the name that matters. And as I dialed, I thought, not for the first time, that Wolfe didn't solve cases. He sentenced them. Kramer came in like a man who'd waited too long for a meal and expected it to taste like disappointment. He planted himself in the red chair like he owned it and glared at Wolfe. Well? Wolfe regarded him as one might a poorly tuned metronome. Senator Arthur Hargrave, Wolfe said with clipped finality, accessory to 2 murders, instigator of a 3rd attempt, and, more egregiously, an appallingly dishonest memoirist. Kramer didn't blink, but his pen came out like a sword. You've got proof? Wolfe gestured, lazily towards Saul, who handed over the folder, neatly arranged, documented, devastating. Kramer flipped a page, whistled low. Wolfe added, I trust the district attorney will appreciate the structure. I've spared him the burden of organization. Kramer muttered, You always do. He stood, folder tucked under his arm. Then pausing, he said, This one's going to explode. Wolfe folded his hands. Then I suggest you wear gloves. Kramer left without another word. Archie Goodwin, on the other hand, had one. Think he'll leak it slow? Wolfe closed his eyes. He'll leak it with spite. The only pressure he respects. Hargrave didn't knock. He slithered back in under the guise of one last word. I almost asked if he'd forgotten his integrity on the hat rack. He stood in front of Wolfe, arms behind his back like a schoolboy about to confess to breaking a window. I'll resign, he said. Wolfe arched a brow. I presume not in favor of a more virtuous candidate. No, I mean quietly. No press conference, no scandal. In exchange. Wolfe's nostrils flared. Ah, there is the clause. Hargrave hesitated. My daughter's father, her real one, does not deserve his name in headlines. He died for what he believed. That tape, it wasn't meant for this. Wolfe stood. That got my attention. Twice in 1 week. Record-breaking. You would trade truth for sentiment, justice for image, a politician's equation. Hargrave winced. It's for Beatrice. Then you should have considered her years ago, Wolfe snapped. When you let a good man vanish behind your cowardice. Hargrave looked 10 years older walking out. Wolfe didn't watch him go. He simply turned to me and said, "Have Fritz prepare dinner. And then, include vinegar, the dish demands it." So did the day. Beatrice arrived just before dusk. No escort, no drama. Just a soft knock, and there she was, alive, pale, and carrying the weight of 3 decades on her shoulders. I let her in, offered coffee, and told her Fritz had prepared enough food to satisfy 2 hunger strikes. She gave a faint smile. He always knew how to comfort people. Wolfe was in the office, waiting. When she entered, he didn't rise. Tradition, restored. But he did incline his head. "Miss Hargrave," he said, "you are fortunate to have survived your father's secrets." She sat. "You're sure?" "Your biological father," Wolfe clarified, "risked everything for the truth. The cassette was his last act. You, knowingly or not, were its last guardian." She pressed her lips together. "And Hargrave?" "Will vanish from public life like smoke," Wolfe said, "unmarked, but no longer unnoticed." She nodded once. "Thank you." When she left, she walked straighter, not because she'd been saved, because she now knew what it had cost. Dinner that night was a melancholy affair with a Viennese accent. Fritz brought out Tafelspitz with apples and horseradish, a dish Wolfe usually considered indulgent bordering on nostalgic. But he didn't object. He even asked for a second helping, which, in our brownstone, is the closest thing to a victory parade. I didn't ask if the menu was a tribute to the late defector, Beatrice's real father. I didn't need to. The sour sweetness of the compote, the carefully trimmed parsley, the silent acknowledgement in Fritz's eyes. It all said plenty. Wolfe finished his plate, dabbed his lips, and muttered, "The Austrians understood war far too well." I was halfway through my own second portion when I said, "So what now?" Wolfe poured himself a beer, just one, and replied, "Now we return to orchids." A silence settled that didn't need to be filled. Sometimes the best closure is a plate licked clean and no questions asked. The next morning, Wolfe summoned me to the plant rooms. He stood among the orchids like a judge among jurors, holding the cassette in his palm as if it were a verdict. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "the secret has served its purpose." I raised a brow. No historical society donation, no posthumous justice. Wolfe's lip curled. History is not advanced by trinkets. He moved to the small cast-iron stove we used for controlling humidity, and without flourish, without even a sigh, he dropped the cassette into the flame. The plastic shrieked, curled, and died. "The man who recorded it," Wolfe said, "is beyond gratitude. The man it condemned is beyond shame. Let it now perish among beauty." The orchids, of course, said nothing, but their scent filled the air like old secrets remembered. I didn't ask if he'd made a copy. I didn't need to. Wolfe does not archive rot. He removes it. I had Dill's notebook in my drawer, under a pile of expense reports, and one half-finished crossword Wolfe had refused to complete on ethical grounds. The last page was dog-eared. The writing, as always, was neat. Former librarian, neat. To Beatrice, "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't keep the storm off your back, but I hope I helped steer it. What you carry is heavier than truth. It's memory. I hope you forgive your father. I hope someday someone forgives me." I stared at the words a long minute, then I copied them, verbatim, onto fine paper. No name, no return address, just an envelope and a stamp. Wolfe didn't ask, but when I slid the letter into the mailbox, I caught him watching through the window. He didn't nod right away. Only when I turned back did he do it. Once. Silent approval. Wolfe's equivalent of a eulogy. The next morning, the house was quiet in the kind of way you don't trust. The kind of quiet that follows fireworks or funerals. I brought Wolfe his beer at the usual time, placed it on the side table with minimal flair, and retreated to the plant rooms. The orchids were thirsty. I've never been sentimental about them, plants that expect you to beg for their attention. But that day, they looked different, or maybe I did. I misted the rows slowly, trimmed a few leaves, repositioned a stubborn root that kept poking out like it had opinions. Wolfe came in silently, which should have been illegal. He stood beside me a moment, watching. "They thrive," he said. "Unlike politicians." He allowed a small grunt. I bent to water the base of a blooming cattleya and thought aloud. "You think secrets always rot the people who keep them?" Wolfe replied. "No, some secrets, like soil, rot only when kept too long. Others feed roots." I paused. "And what was this one?" He didn't answer, but the orchids were blooming, full, rich, almost defiant. And as I closed the watering can, I figured Wolfe didn't need to answer. Some secrets die, others bloom, and some, if you're lucky, get burned before they ever take root. In the end, the truth didn't arrive with sirens or spotlights, just a quiet nod, a letter without a signature, and a cassette reduced to ash among orchids. Justice came not in fury, but in stillness, where silence held more weight than headlines. And in that stillness, a young woman found the shape of a father she never truly knew, and a nation turned its back once more on a secret it preferred forgotten. Would you have protected the truth, or buried it like Wolfe among his blossoms? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the mystery, be sure to like the video, share it with someone who loves detective stories, and subscribe for more. Not every case ends with applause, but the truth, once found, always echoes.